a little bit about his personality.
His personality. He was a decidedly decent man, and I think I'm asked sometimes, I spent 8 years on this, and I could have spent 15. I mean, if I had the time and the inclination or to do it, because there's so much to learn, and there remains. When I'm preparing for a program like this, I do more work. And I did a little more work on anticipating that you might ask me about, the Jewish cemetery at Newport. I think I needed to know a little. So I'm constantly learning things about him. But one thing I'm often asked, what surprised you the most about Longfellow in your research? And I said, what didn't surprise me so much as just kind of reaffirmed, but just how truly decent a man that he was. He was honest. He was a man of great moral character. He was really, you can't meet anyone who ever met him who didn't like him, who wasn't impressed with him. The only person I can think of who intensely disliked him is someone who never met him, was Edgar Allan Poe. And he had issues that were, entirely of his own. He was a disturbed man. He was envious of Longfellow's great celebrity. He'd married a wonderful, wealthy young woman. He had a position. He called him the professor. He called him the Frog Pondians, this whole clique of Cambridge and Boston intellectuals. This is the Frog Pond, it's called in Boston commerce. It was a Poe's sneer at this cabal of intellectuals who he detested. So there's that. But I guess just the utter decency of Longfellow, and that you just can't find any mention of him where people met him and weren't really genuinely impressed by him. If you were speaking with him, he would look you in the eyes, and he really wanted to hear what you had to say. People complain, "What's Longfellow? You never tell us much about yourself." And he said, "I guess I don't. I want to hear about you." And he meant that. Unfortunately, he kept a wonderful journal throughout his life, 50 years or so. I photographed every page of it in the Houghton Library at Harvard, hundreds of photographs. And while he tells us a lot about what's going on in his life and the daily activities, he really doesn't tell us much about the creative process, where these well springs of creativity are coming from. He gives us hints, again, to return to the Jewish cemetery at Newport. I can tell you precisely the day he got the idea for that. If I may, should I move on to that?
We'll get to that. I
expect you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we'll get to that.
Okay, good. But remind me to talk about how that came about. But he would record these events. He's walking downtown. He sees some gravestones behind the locked gate, and he becomes curious. But anyway, we'll get to that. But he will record these details of his life. But one day he will say, "Okay, I began today," and he's beginning today. I began today, and he says, "My epic poem on Menzaboho," and that's the name. That was what the name of this long poem about Native Americans was going to be, and then he changes it to Hiawatha later. And he thinks, and also because it's got a sound to it, he thinks it's another name. He believes it's another name for the same Indian chieftain from legendary times. And he says it has a nice eponymous sound to it, and he likes the sound of Hiawatha. It's very melodious, and it sounds good rolling off the tongue. So he'll tell us that, Right. But what really emboldened him to write about the Native Americans, we have to divine that from other sources. They're available, but that's why it takes 8 years to research one of these things.